Thanks all for watching another episode, let's call it, of Tech Talk on SoilOptix. Today we're going to dive into nitrogen management and just give you some background information of how you can use SoilOptix in managing your nitrogen on your farm, plus a few other topics. So when you look at a field, you see soil variability. And that variability can come in just about any crop that you grow. But ultimately, when we're trying to manage things with variable rate technology, we're trying to manage that variability. You've seen the law of the minimum, the barrel with the staves, a bunch of different ways to present it. And ultimately, we're all trying to, shore up these lower staves so that, our yield doesn't leak out, so to speak. And variable rate technology does help us manage a lot of those nutrient side of things, but it's not necessarily all nutrients. It can be, disease or insects or the condition your fields are in, or certainly environment is a big one. But there's certain things that we can manage, so we try to manage them as best we can. Plus, when you're looking at that, you got to look at the balance of nutrient interactions, because when you put on too much of something, what is it influencing somewhere else? Or where's your pH and how is that influencing what we're trying to do in growing a crop? A lot of this is not nitrogen stuff, but you'll see where we're getting in the end. When you look at the soil, we all know a sand, silt, and a clay are uniquely different soils. Sands are a broad sized particle, where our clays are very minute particles. We know a sand doesn't hold water near as good as a silt or a clay. Well, then why are we suggesting, and some of the experts out there suggesting, you use the same amount of nutrition on a sand as you do a clay for maybe its optimum levels of, for example, potassium or something? But you got to be wary of what we're playing with from a texture perspective. You also got to look at your fertilizer efficiency. And if you had the opportunity to watch our talk on the calcium and liming, this is a slide that we use. And when you look at that soil pH and how it affects, and we'll specifically look at nitrogen, we're wasting 53% of our fertilizer dollars at a 5 pH with that low pH unless we do something about it. And that's a lot of money that we're not being able to take advantage of on our nitrogen management. And when you look at how that crop grows, we need boron, silica, and calcium in order to get that nitrogen functioning for us. So putting more nitrogen on or more on, you're not necessarily going to get to where you need to be unless you look at the complete circle of nutrients that it takes to grow that crop. So why are we wanting to even look at the variable rate? Well, it all starts with the soil. We have to know what we're working with. Soil variability is constant year to year. We can't change the environment that the crops grow in, but that variability we have in our soil will change. Some years in some parts of the prairies last year, the low spots were a devastation just because there's so much rain, and the hilltops that were usually dry were fantastic. Years before, a few years earlier, when it was so hot and dry, those hilltops burnt out and they didn't perform, where those low spots were phenomenal. So that variability is constant. How that variability displays itself is different, but that variability is constant. So how do you measure it? We're going to look at one field here where we have a various zones, so a good mapping system to look at zone management versus the SoilOptix. This is the various zone map, and this is our total count map that we get from SoilOptix. One of the good things between these two maps is you can see the pattern. So we got this pattern down in the bottom, and then we've got, it's a little different color, but we've got our pattern with the total count. We've got a triangle out here and triangle out there. You can look back and forth between these pictures and see a lot of correlation. So we are mapping soil changes, but we're specifically going to focus in on this small area of the field. When you look at this, we've got an organic matter in the background. So the red areas are lower organic matter. The green areas are better organic matter. You look at the potato crop growing there. Potatoes are a great crop to use when or to discover nutrient deficiencies and different challenges, just like corn is, because some crops whisper to you, like our broadacre crops, but some crops scream what's going on. This potato crop couldn't have screamed any louder. It's done. Yield is set. We're not going to gain any more. Where the tops over here, this crop has a lot of life left in them. Should we manage the nitrogen different or the same in these two spots? When you look at the zone map, these are both in the same zone, and they were only 60 feet apart. So how did a Veris zone, which did a good job of mapping the transitions, it didn't pick out some of these smaller areas of the field? And this wasn't that small of a spot. It was big enough, but it was attributed into that same zone. We needed a lot drastic different nitrogen program in this area of the field. This isn't necessarily a soil optics picture, but it's looking at a crop, and you can see right in here, if it shows up on your screen properly, that the crop isn't doing as well, and to the side, it's doing quite a bit better. Original thought was, oh, we got a nitrogen problem. But then as we got diving into it and did tissue tests and talking with the grower, what we actually found is the potassium bridge. So we don't have the potassium levels down on this strip like we do on the rest of the field. Besides his weed control, which was getting a little on the late side, you can see substantial difference in growth. When they pulled the plants out and put them side by side, again, you could see substantial difference in growth. So by delivering a balanced nutrition program, the crop's more advanced, it's going to mature earlier. If we're in a short season area, what's the value of that in getting that crop off in the bin in good quality? But I wanted to point you at the tissue sample because it's actually quite interesting. So the area that had low potassium has low potassium compared to the area that had good potassium. So we are getting better potassium uptake. But also look at what's going on with our nitrogen. We had almost 3.7% nitrogen in the low potassium spot, but we have 2.7% in the good potassium potassium spot. We didn't change the nitrogen application, but what's going on here, because those nutrients are balanced, this crop is working harder. So it's actually using the background fertility that we've placed up. And if you can actually look at the phosphorus right beside it too, we're at a 0.27 on the poor spot and a 0.14 on the good spot. So this plant here is working a lot harder. Only different is we got adequate potassium in order to feed that crop. That's why balance is so important when you're trying to manage any nutrient. Just an example of a variable rate nitrogen map based off of a Varus or an EM zone, ranging from 120 pounds of product up to 159. When you look at another field here, we got a satellite zone versus a 5-acre site specific, and we'll focus on this red area, which is zone 1. We have 13 part per million nitrate nitrogen as a background residual. Within that zone, we've got a 72, a 39, a 36, and these are all parts per million, so you double that per pounds per acre. So this spot's saying I got 13 parts per million or 26 pounds. This spot, I'm at 144 pounds an acre of background nitrogen. We actually went back in and pulled some samples because we didn't believe them, and the lab confirmed these areas are right. So within this zone, I've got a 72 and I've got a 5. How do I manage nitrogen properly with the zone that hasn't captured the true variability in that field, specifically on residual nitrate nitrogen? So the Varus or EM does a great job of collecting the where, but then you create 3 to 7 zones depending on the system you're working with, and we lose the details. But does it really find the what? What about rough fields or vegetation or moisture? And the EM is very sensitive to electrical and power lines, so is it giving you a good job? So we go back to that same field and we're looking at our organic matter in that ridge in the middle, and I would say this zone map did capture how the general trends in that field are pretty good. But we got 1.9% organic matter versus 4.6. Within that same 1.9 zone 1, the SoilOptix, we have some spots in here that are 0.8 to beside the yard, we're at 4. So this is roughly 40 pounds of nitrogen availability. This is 10. This is going to give us around 20. This is an average. This is site specific. The zone doesn't get us anywhere close we need to be in order to properly manage the nitrogen in this field. With the SoilOptix and looking at the different nutrient interactions of what we're seeing in the field, we can really dive into the why. Why are these areas lodging? Do we have high residual nitrates? Do we have low potassium? Do we have some manganese issues? What's going on with our pH? And looking at those other factors, we can identify soil texture challenges with our sand, silt, clay, and loam, and look at the antagonism and synergism between these nutrients to dial in a better nutrient program and focusing on nitrogen for this talk. When you look at the organic matter, this is a grid sample from the fall of 2013 versus a SoilOptix from the fall of 2018. You can see the general areas are close, but the SoilOptix really dialed in on the extremes that are going. So now we can do a much better job of managing the nitrogen. We had a 3.6 to a 20% range of organic matter, but with the SoilOptix, we got a 4.1 to a 57. It never picked up the peat bog that's in the field. We also went from an average of 8 to an average of 10. So over time, that grower's done a good job building his organic matter. Now we have it at a higher resolution. CEC, that's a other factor that we look at when we're trying to balance and deliver our nitrogen. Where's the CEC levels in the background, and where are they varying? Nitrate nitrogen on that same field, and many years, 5 years of variable rate has dropped the background nitrate nitrogen levels down to now we've got an average of 5, not an average of 23. So now, with our benchmark samples, we were able to watch this and amended those areas. Now with the full map, we can dive right in again and deliver a better program for that farm. When you look at your sand, silt, and clay layers and how that comes back to a texture, that particular field, we got 72% sand, 20% silt, 8% clay, puts us in a sandy loam. Well, why would we want to know texture? Well, water moves, doesn't it? Is it moving to a sand or a clay? When we're managing our nitrogen, it's important to know that so we can appropriately apply the amount of nutrients, but also be able to multiple stage apply so we can use that information in season and react to the environmental conditions that we've been given. And if we've got a clay area that's been drowned out, obviously we're not going to put any more groceries on it. But if we've got a sandy area that's doing very well because it's wet, we can push it a little harder. And vice versa. If that sand has dried up on a dry year, we're not going to go push that area really any harder. But those areas where we have higher clay, we're going to push them a little bit further. When you look at that wetness potential and how moisture flows, we have a consultant that we used to work with that would drive around with his in-field vehicle and map out all the hollows, and we would use that in our variable rate planning. With the SoilOptix, we were able to define those areas much better and ramp them a little bit better. Although it looks like a hard number, these are actually a little softer, but they're quick. So we can more precisely place our nitrogen better within the field. But not just manage the nitrogen, we can also do the inverse and manage our K. So those areas are prone to lodging. So not only are we backing off the nitrogen, we're boosting up the potassium to help that crop even out in its maturity and help with the standability. There's another field when we're looking at organic matter, which was from the fall of 18. This particular field ranged from 2% on the bottom end to 7.6 on the top end with an average of 4.5. How do you manage nitrogen on something like that? Well, when you bring all the factors in that we're looking at to variable rate nitrogen, some areas, because of the sand and the low organic matter, we had to back off because they just don't have the potential that the rest of the field does. So we're ranging from 115 to 240 pounds of nitrogen product applied with an average of 197. So we're precisely placing it in the field based on the SoilOptix layers that we have to look at. So we come back to that same zone field again, and with the Varus nitrogen ranging from 120 to 160 with an average of 138. Using the same methodology in calculating the nitrogen recommendation with a site-specific end, meaning more of a grid-based, we've got a bigger range, and the average came down a little bit to a 131. When we take the SoilOptix on that field, and I put it over 3D here just so you could see some of the topography, our range actually broadens up even again because we've defined some of those areas that need help, but also areas where we can't push it hard. And we've backed that average now back down to 124. So we're have a wider range and actually needing less nitrogen on that field using the same input, but just looking at different data in order to get us there. In 2019, we had some good results out of Alberta, a popular zone program to the SoilOptix suite. What we saw was 3 weeks earlier on the SoilOptix field, more even maturity and less nitrogen used. Plus, we got 20 bushels better and 1 grade better. And that's 1 grade better on 100% of the bushels, not just extra bushels. We also saw that year on a program with canola done variable rate on grids versus the SoilOptix, we got a 7 bushel bump again. So that very quickly pays for that SoilOptix layer in 1 year. Just a picture of that wheat, you can see this is the SoilOptix field when they're doing their desiccant versus the zone program. You can see that they were pushing the nitrogen harder, maybe didn't quite define the areas good enough, but we have no issues with the crop standing here. And this year, it actually turned out to be more than 3 weeks in the end. It was closer to 5 because weather got involved, and they ended up swathing this field. So what does it cost to take a swather across the field versus straight cutting? That's a huge cost that you got to add into a grower's expense. 3 weeks of maturity. This got off with that better grade, so they got a lot more money for it. This year, they struggled to get it off, so you lost some grade. This could have potentially been turned into feed wheat if the weather didn't turn around. So when you're managing nitrogen, there's more to managing nitrogen than just nitrogen. We need to look at a lot of other factors. If you've watched some of our other tech talks, we always talk about balance, and we can't get focused on a single nutrient We've got to focus on the whole gamut of what it takes to grow that crop. We need to look at our pH, potentially our ratios, our textures, our organic matter, nitrate, nitrogen, the relationships, how water moves, where does it move to, and what kind of soil is it moving to. With that, that's kind of summarizes our brief talk on SoilOptix and nitrogen. Left some contact information here if you have to be watching. By means, if you want any other questions answered or some more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or the folks at SoilOptix, and we can steer you in the right direction.